Welcome to Drink Coffee and Talk Planes. My name is Richard. Please like and subscribe. And now for a topic. I wasn't going to do this soon in my sort of things. It's always been one I wanted to talk about, but I sort of decided I could do it in a multi-part, at least a 2-part version, maybe a 3 or 4 or 5-part, depending on comments. But it's a topic that's really important to me, and I guess important to a lot of people in New Zealand in the community. But we'll sort of start off fairly straightforward. Should the Royal New Zealand Air Force rebuild its combat wing? The combat wing was disestablished in New Zealand in the early 2000s, and it has ceased to be ever since. The closest we have now are the Texan 2s, which are primarily, I believe, based down in Ohakea. I'm really going off script here because it's just one that sort of comes up now as things around the world have sort of started to change. So I'm just going to say welcome to 2025, a year that started with Chinese warships off the coast of New Zealand and Australia, and obviously changes in US global policy. So should the New Zealand Air Force rebuild its combat air wing? So in short, why? I guess for people who don't live in New Zealand, it's probably, like why would we bother? We're right down on the bottom edge of the world and stuff like that. But I guess, as I just pointed out, the Chinese have reminded us that, hey, they remember we're here. I mean, primarily I feel like that was directed at Australia, but I think it's a healthy reminder for us as well, that we're not attached to the world. We are around about 2,000 kilometres off the coast of Australia. We are the most isolated, large-scale population and island in the world. So it puts us in a unique position, and we don't have a combat air wing. So when it comes to fast response to threats, we don't really have anything, and we kind of depend on Australia. And if you look at the world, everything's sort of north, east, south and west. Yep. Never eat soggy wheat bix. That's how I remember. Off to our east, there's nothing there, and then it's America, and that's, I'm not even sure how far away that is. I'm going to say over 10,000 kilometres that way. It's a long way that way. And if you didn't guess, we have a navy. We have a couple of frigates. They're very old now, but still capable. They've been both of them been refurbished. I can't remember. But they're slow, it's slow. It's, when it comes to frigates, full stop, of any nation. It takes time for a ship to get from A to B. And air power, and amazingly, we have the P8 Poseidon, which is fantastic. Definitely a good investment to replace the Orions with the P8s. So, great investment there. We can quickly cover a lot of ground. But when it comes to a show of force that's quick to bear and capable, we don't really have anything off the shelf as such. At this exact moment, or at least how the news or media present things at the moment, it seems that every country is out for itself at the moment, and obviously people are trying to rethink their approaches to defence and military technology. Hopefully our cousins in Australia would certainly be there for us. I believe they would be if they can, which is a point I'll obviously get to. Fairly certain our cousins across the ditch will be there for us. Right, we're not truly isolated has now been proved, and we have a very large exclusive economic zone. We have a lot of water, a lot of territory around us. And there are also other small nations in the Pacific that look to us for support, not just Australia, but they also look to New Zealand. And yes, we provide humanitarian aid through Hercules and through our naval vessels. But maybe there is a chance we may have to deploy more offensive, defensive capabilities. So what is there to consider? we're a small country with a small budget. So if we're going to buy something, what would we buy? Is the question. This is the whole point of this. What would we buy? We used to have A4K Skyhawks. You'll see, I have my dear friend, the Skyhawk model, right behind me. That is a United States one, and you'll notice obviously not one of ours as well, because you can see the hump, which we had removed when we fitted the more advanced avionics. So we have a lot of things to consider, because we're not in the same position as bigger nations. So we're a small country with a small budget for this type of thing. Maintenance and running costs over time are hugely influential on the amount of training, the amount of experience, the amount of stuff that will happen with these aircraft if they're too expensive to run. Range and payload is obviously a big thing. They need to be able to, on their own volition, in my opinion, be able to fly from New Zealand to Australia and land safely at, anything on the east coast of Australia, preferably. And further afield would obviously be even better. Need multiple redeployment options, so they can't necessarily be aircraft that are designed to only operate in pristine Air Force environments, which is something I'll get to. Independence of operation. They need to be able to operate without advanced support. And I point that out because of how easily isolated we can become as a country, with some strategically well-placed assaults on our infrastructure or on the connecting infrastructure to other parts of the world. We could become technically very isolated very quickly and need to be able to operate. It's our isolation, it's our distances, so we need to be able to operate in very adverse conditions if they are thrust upon us. Interoperability with our allies. Now that, when it comes to strike aircraft and that sort of thing, maritime strike, I'm a little bit jury's out on that one. I'm going to say weapons, definitely should be able to share weapons load, but interoperability, as much as we can get in the right price bracket and the right plane. Reliability, once again, it needs to be something we can keep going on the smell of an oily rag. So, right. So now I get down to the planes that inevitably people who talk to me in public, or people I've hung out with, or people I've talked to that I've met over the years will obviously, the obvious plane A is the F-35. It's what Australia investing in, what Australia building on. For me, it just doesn't make sense. The only reason we'd do it would be interoperability with Australia, and maybe if there was some financial incentive that we were kind of subleasing equipment from Australia, but we'd have to be able to keep it here. Basically, so we still had a capability of our own. So I have a lot of, I guess, for the obvious option A, I have a lot of obvious things. It's a very complex aircraft. It's a very advanced aircraft. It's a very maintenance. I'm not going to say maintenance heavy just in case, but I'm going to say maintenance has to be done properly and has to be done well. It's not really something you're going to be holding together with, chewing gum and bits of number 8 wire to get it going. It's a single engine aircraft, and we are an island with a lot of water. And if a pilot ejects, 1,000 kilometres out to sea, it's going to be a while before he's going to get some help. So, as much as people go on and on about reliability of these modern single-engine aircraft, we don't really fall into that category because we just don't have that option. Our planes have to get from A to B, even under adverse conditions. And I will say, amazingly, the A4Ks, we kept them pristine. And in, a single-engine aircraft, I always had my doubts about the A4K, but I actually grew to love that plane, but I don't feel like the concept behind the A4K, or the A4 in general, is similar to the F-35. It just seems like a lot of infrastructure, a lot of support structures, a lot of cost to operation, which means we wouldn't run it very often. And if we had a change of government, which is the other thing you have to take into account, they may reduce funding, in which case the planes will end up just gathering dust or be redeployed to Australia for when we need them, which then creates a whole raft of problems if something happens. Interoperability is the key there. Number 2, the original Skyhawk replacement, which was going to be the F-16. Obviously, the current blocks of F-16, which is still in production. Once again, we have that issue of a single-engine aircraft. It's still capable, but it falls into the needs a good, clean operating base for it. And I'll come back to that topic. Running cost is obviously better in general for maintenance, just because of how the commonality of the aircraft compared to the F-35s, and the fact they don't have special coatings or any of that sort of stuff. So, even though the F-35 has proven to be not too bad, still falls into the probably too delicate for what we need space, and I don't know, I just feel like a bit of ground damage. There was another aircraft I was thinking of actually at the time. This is an interesting one that came up. Retired and refurbished F-18 Super Hornets, or F-18 Hornets from the Royal Australian Air Force. I'm going to say Super Hornets just because. Or purchased new. One, because our Australian colleagues and the Canadians and stuff, there's a lot of these planes around. They are twin-engined, obviously. They were built for the Navy. Still require that comfortable operating facility, but, in the big scheme of things, pretty plane as well. I do like the Hornet. I really like the F-16, by the way, to look at. If we back the truck up, I think the F-16 is a stunning looking plane. So I would buy it on looks, but practicality, maybe not so much. And the same with the F-18. I think it was really good show about the F-18 pilots in Canada. I was trying to remember what it's called. Anyway, can't remember. Really good show. I'll probably find it and put a note in the text here somewhere so I can update that. Where they do their training at Cold Lake. What was that show? Anyway, right, now my biggest soft spots when it comes to something that would be cool. It would look cool. It would give us something a bit different down in this part of the world. We could probably get access to it. We're still allies with America. I still support the US. We're still on that side of the fence, US and Europe. So my soft spot is the F-15EX by Boeing now. Just an aircraft with a great track record. Well thought out and stuff. But from what I've heard in other documents and bits and pieces, probably not much of a cost saving compared to the F-35, but maybe the twin engine, good range, the drop tanks, all that sort of stuff. We don't probably, stealth might be beneficial to us if we're trying to hit an aircraft carrier or shipping or something coming in. But at the end of the day, twin engine is a big thing for us to operate just over so much water. Or the Eurofighter, obviously another aircraft in that space. Damn good looking plane, ultra maneuverable. Both of these planes capable of carrying a huge amount of ordnance, and well known and well understood aircraft. So the delicate maintenance thing just crops up again. I feel like we would put ourselves in a tough spot, and sadly the single engine thing also, even though I haven't written it down here, affects the gripping as well. where we sort of end in that space, yes, they are far more reliable and stuff, but the other thing is, I also look at this, like New Zealand, we have training, we have pilots training all the time, we have them flying all the time, and surprisingly we have very low attrition rate with the Skyhawks, but these modern aircraft, they are worth so much money. If we have an issue and the pilot ejects and the plane crashes and there's 100 million down the tubes or more, it's a tough day for New Zealand, and we would just end up running out. We just couldn't afford that sort of level of cost. Okay, right. So I've kind of sort of given some sort of rough aircraft that are commonly suggested or people bring up or forums or whatever, and I sort of, in a weird way, have poo-pooed them all because, in a weird way, as much as these are single engine aircraft I'm about to talk about, you kind of need something along the lines of the Draken, or the Vigan, or that sort of thing, where they can be deployed to strengthened runways and stuff like that, strengthened roadways and things. But I get it. There will be a definite thing. There's a few planes that I'm not talking about in this episode, that I definitely have a fondness for, that I kind of think might be more appropriate for the roles. But I am going to give an example of a scenario that I've discussed a couple of times in the past, and it sort of might give an idea of kind of where the thought processes are around New Zealand's, if we ever rebuilt a maritime strike wing, which to me would seem like a logical decision. Really, New Zealand should invest in Navy and Air Force as the two primary arms compared to the Army, even though the Army, is obviously essential, especially when they get here. But I think because a lot of Army equipment is more cost effective to purchase, we have sort of gone down that track a lot. So the Army, I guess, probably get more regular upgrades, or at least that's how it seems to the public, because we see a lot more Army videos than we do Navy or Air Force. So anyway, so no, I'm not having a crack at our Army. Our Army's amazing, really skilled, really thing. But once again, it's scale, and our capabilities to survive. And I guess I'm going to give a scenario in that case. Right, so this is the thought process here. Is number one, preemptive strikes. So New Zealand's main military facilities and major population hubs are hit by missile strike, either ballistic missile or surface to surface, launched from naval vessels or submarine. And Ohaki is an obvious target. It would just get thumped, straight off the cuff. Would burn. Depending how up to date the records are, they might even hit Wigram. Anywhere that there is a facility like that, but they will leave. You would imagine they would leave Auckland Airport intact. They'd leave Christchurch Airport intact, because one, it'll be a surprise. When it happens, it'll be a surprise. They will hit those targets. They may not necessarily destroy them, but they will cause enough damage that they will be technically unusable, or facilities will be damaged enough that they'll be unusable. At this point in time, you would imagine that Australia would be engaged in combat in the Northern Territory, up in the northern area. If we're talking about certain countries that are currently on the radar as far as threats to this part of the world. So they'd be busy. Their ability to divert resources when it comes to a powerful, large-scale enemy to help the small country down the bottom, which they would think was safe by distance, could be quite limited. And also the advantage that you would see is that they would be trying to get to us, so that they end up kind of behind a lot of the key defences or military facilities of a nation, 10,000 kilometres-ish that way and 2,000 kilometres that way. So basically what they call an unsinkable carrier. Nuclear submarine surfaces in the Cook Strait or in Auckland Harbour and Hauraki Gulf or whatever, and just, while we're distracted with that, a couple of, dare I say it, torpedoes hitting our ships in Devonport, or at least damaging the harbour structure or whatever, laying sea mines secretly in the Hauraki Gulf to basically instantly disable our naval power. And then ships which have currently been sitting up off some of the islands further north or out to sea, out into the deep sea, because we're surrounded by water in all directions, very hard to keep an eye out for everything, then start sailing 24 to 48 hours to be into New Zealand shores. And of course an airlift would immediately, after dropping paratroopers and other military personnel onto our land-based civilian facilities, then they'd be able to bring air transports in, which they would have landed at some of the islands out to sea, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, if they managed to keep the airstrips intact, land the aircrafts there, refueled them, which they were, staging positions, and then flown them down to New Zealand just after all our infrastructure, our key defensive infrastructure, has been hit. Primarily at Auckland and Christchurch Airport. So key notes from that: the most likely is that any of the carrier groups, or the things that we would be like, oh well, we couldn't deal with those anyway, would most likely be engaged in the larger theatres like Australia, or still sitting stationed to provide sort of air support in the Pacific region and protect that sort of soft middle bit from American or other nations sort of interfering with logistics. New Zealand could deploy a fairly simple but well-ranged maritime strike aircraft focused on anti-shipping to intercept ships with standoff air-to-surface weapons. So that's sort of the premise of the aircraft you're looking at, is one that can be dispersed from primary airfields, so it needs to be able to operate from rough strips or motorways or other less equipped facilities. So you think about it, the missile is normally primarily going to hit the runway. It's going to hit the runway. That's the sort of the key target they're going to look for, to destroy the ability for aircraft to get back on the ground and off the ground at Ohakea and other main military facilities. So what you would find is that you possibly, even if the aircraft was still on site, so taking into account the ones that weren't completely destroyed or damaged, would then be able to be dispersed somewhere else, because they could operate from, if you had reinforced some of the fields nearby or something for this type of operation, if that's our forward thinking, then we could fly them somewhere else to be refueled and maintained to minor airstrips, like one near me, like Matamata airfield or something like that, or another one near me, like Hamilton Airport, or another one, you know what I mean, just like these smaller airstrips that are unlikely to waste $1 million or $10 million ballistic missiles on to try and hit. And then our aircraft, which are capable of carrying standoff or even more basic bombs and missiles and stuff, can be used to do this sort of general work: fly out, launch a missile, hope like hell it hits a ship out at sea, fly back, that sort of thing. So it does have to be a jet aircraft, probably, because it's going to need a radome, or it needs to be some sort of twin engine, and it could even be an existing aircraft used for another purpose, repurposed for this type of work, specifically for New Zealand, because obviously you purchase military equipment primarily to do the roles that your country requires, and these sorts of aircraft do exist. So operating from rough SIP, able to work with limited support, so basic maintenance tools for general aviation and stuff like that would have to be able to be used on it primarily. And even if it lost some of its capability because certain services weren't available, it would still have to be able to operate as an aircraft, and still fly sorties. and, hit targets and drop bombs and shoot bullets and do the basics. Be reliable, be well built and strong, for low level, really, really designed for flying through the hills and stuff, so it could get back to places even if it was being hunted by a much more superior air superiority aircraft. It could still get down and dirty, and get away in New Zealand's countryside, which is one of our true strengths. Obviously be able to operate without advanced guidance. There is a chance that things like GPS and other sorts of guidance services and things will be disrupted and destroyed. I do call this part one. It's really a thought exercise about what plane would you buy for that purpose. I mean, I end this knowing from politics in the past and stuff like that, we're very likely to buy what Australia purchases, or we're very likely to buy what the current in thing is. I'm not going to hold it against this government if they purchase the F-35 and take a punt on the appropriateness of that aircraft in a genuine fight, or whether we're just purchasing it so that we can support Australia and hope and pray that the combat all occurs north of New Zealand and outside of our, territorial areas, that we're taking the fight to them kind of thing. But if it did get to here, what happens? You know what I mean? Like, you've got to talk about, you're not necessarily going to win, perhaps, but you're certainly going to make them think twice about it. And something that people point out is if you sink a ship at sea, you can have one missile on one aircraft that can fly out and get there. Ships are slow comparatively the whole time. And to deploy enough troops to New Zealand, if you think about it, the main aircraft you're going to be shooting down are going to be transport planes, because they're the only things with the range to get here. And bombers are going to be looking for primary targets, so obvious targets. So if your aircraft can be redistributed to rough strips and things like that, they're less likely to find them, and then they can be deployed, shoot down transport aircraft, so therefore more troops aren't arriving. But the other thing is they can also take out transport ships. So you think one lucky missile that gets through the defences, hits that ship and sinks it, might take out thousands of troops. And to replace shipping is slow. So, there's some big advantages to quick air power. If you think about it, if I take it on that case in the other direction, one of their aircrafts sinks one of our frigates. We only have 2 frigates. That's 50% of our heavy naval force gone. And then they only have the other one to deal with. And that is the thing. You've got to make it hard for your opponents. And I think New Zealand has to be smarter. I think we can't think like Australia. We can't think like the US. We can't think like Europe. We're a tiny, tiny country with a very small population. We have to be smart and we have to be effective. So, to me, as much as the F-35 is the prettiest plane on the block, well, it's not to me, but, the F-15EX or the F-16 with conformal tanks, fully armed, damn good-looking planes, they're not necessarily the right thing for the job, and it might be something a bit more bland, you know what I mean? It might be something a bit more just serviceable and useful and a working, cost-effective aircraft that does the bloody job at the end of the day and is easy to fly and easy to maintain and has just enough capability to do the job on the day when it's required. From drones to air defence missiles to, these sorts of things, instead of just spending money on the big toys that we all know and love, maybe it's thinking a bit more, laterally. Like we have some, at the end of the day, if you're number of Air Force trained pilots is getting pushed in the ground, you kind of hope that maybe some crop dusting pilots could easily jump into the same cockpit and pretty much learn in a couple of days how to fly the damn thing, because you know they're going to be good at flying low and, you know, nap of the earth. You just got to teach them how to pull the trigger. So I think there's practicalities to this for New Zealand, and sadly, you know, politics will probably get involved and we'll end up purchasing the wrong thing just because, but you hope that's not the case. So fingers crossed. But anyway, this is just a thought exercise. I have no influence. I don't work for the New Zealand Air Force. I have no relationship with the government or any of these things. I'm just somebody who's an aviation enthusiast, and I love cool planes, and I'd love to see cool planes in New Zealand skies. But if it's a practical, not so cool plane, I think that would be appropriate, and I think at the end of the day I'd be happy to know we did the right thing. But I do think we need that type of aircraft to protect this country's sovereign territory and provide that sort of backup support for Australia. And in fact, you know, we might just offer enough to help turn that tide that the big boys can really get in those punches that are required at the time. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Please leave comments on the aircrafts you think of. There's a few things, and it's funny, I do get tied up on, you know, do you experiment with the newest and latest thing? The Textron Scorpion that I keep seeing, because I'm like, you know what, it's quite a funky sort of concept, you know, but the trouble is we would be the first customer, but, you know, maybe that's a step we would take, because they might customise it specifically for maritime strike. I don't know, you know, I'm saying creativity, you know, think outside the box. What would help the Royal New Zealand Air Force really do the appropriate job for a country like ours the way we are? Okay, thank you very much.